The morning sun painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold as Prince William stood before the tall mirror in his private dressing room at Kensington Palace. His hands moved slowly as he fastened each button on his ceremonial uniform, the same uniform his father had worn decades ago during important royal occasions. The deep navy blue fabric was adorned with golden threads that caught the early morning light, creating patterns that seemed to dance across his chest. Today was different from any other day in his life. Today his father would be crowned King of England, and William would officially become the heir apparent to the throne. Catherine entered the room quietly, her footsteps soft against the polished wooden floor. She wore an elegant cream-colored dress that flowed gracefully around her ankles, designed specifically for this momentous occasion. The dress featured delicate embroidery that told the story of their family journey, with tiny roses representing England and thistles representing Scotland woven into the fabric. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated updo held in place by a tiara that had belonged to Princess Diana. The diamonds sparkled like stars against her dark hair, and William felt his breath catch in his throat as he looked at his beautiful wife. Their 3 children sat on small velvet chairs near the window, unusually quiet and well-behaved. George, now 11 years old, understood the importance of this day more than his younger siblings. He wore a miniature version of his father's uniform, complete with tiny medals and golden braiding. His blonde hair was combed neatly to one side, and his blue eyes held a seriousness that made him look older than his years. George had been practicing his royal wave in the mirror for weeks, determined to make his family proud during the public appearances that would follow the ceremony. Year-old Charlotte looked like a princess from a fairy tale in her pale pink dress. The fabric shimmered with each movement, and tiny pearls were sewn along the neckline and sleeves. Her long blonde hair was styled in elegant curls that cascaded down her back, topped with a small tiara that matched her mother's. Charlotte had been asking questions about the coronation for months, wanting to understand every detail of what would happen during the ceremony. She had even practiced curtsying in front of her bedroom mirror, determined to show proper respect to her grandfather when the moment came. 5-year-old Louis sat swinging his legs from his chair, his energy barely contained despite his best efforts to remain still. He wore a small suit that matched his father's, complete with a tiny sword at his side that was purely ceremonial. His reddish blonde hair refused to stay completely flat despite multiple attempts with hair gel, giving to him a slightly mischievous appearance that made his parents smile. Louis had been told many times about the importance of being quiet during the long ceremony, but his parents worried that his natural enthusiasm might get the better of him at such a crucial moment. William walked over to the window and looked out at the streets of London below. Even at this early hour, crowds were already gathering along the processional route. People had camped out overnight to secure the best viewing spots, their colorful tents and sleeping bags creating a festive atmosphere throughout the city. British flags hung from every window and lamppost, fluttering gently in the morning breeze. The sight of so many people coming together to celebrate this historic moment filled William with both pride and nervousness. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. After today, he would no longer simply be Prince William. He would be the heir to the throne, next in line to become King of England. The thought of following in his father's footsteps and eventually his grandmother's legacy felt overwhelming. Queen Elizabeth had reigned for 70 years, becoming one of the most beloved monarchs in British history. How could he possibly live up to such an incredible example of service and dedication? Catherine moved to stand beside him at the window, her hand finding his and squeezing gently. She understood his feelings without him having to speak them aloud. They had talked late into the night about what this day would mean for their family. Their children would grow up with even more public scrutiny and responsibility than before. George especially would need to be prepared for his future role as king, a burden that seemed too heavy for such young shoulders. The sound of church bells began to ring across London, their deep tones echoing off the ancient buildings and modern skyscrapers alike. The bells of Westminster Abbey joined the chorus, followed by churches throughout the city and across the entire kingdom. It was a sound that had announced royal celebrations for over 1,000 years, connecting this moment to countless generations of British history. A gentle knock at the door interrupted their thoughts. A palisade entered and announced that it was time to begin the journey to Westminster Abbey. The royal convoy was waiting outside, with security teams positioned along every mile of the route. Millions of people around the world would be watching on television, and thousands more would line the streets to catch a glimpse of the royal family. William took a deep breath and turned to face his children. George stood up immediately, his back straight and his expression serious. Charlotte smoothed down her dress and checked her reflection in the mirror one final time. Louis bounced slightly on his toes, his excitement barely contained despite his young age. The family made their way through the palace corridors, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Portraits of previous kings and queens looked down at them from gilded frames, silent witnesses to this continuation of royal tradition. William felt the presence of his late mother, Princess Diana, and his beloved grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, as if they were walking alongside him during this important moment. Outside, the morning air was crisp and clear. The royal car waited with its doors open, polished to a mirror shine and decorated with small flags representing the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth nations. The crowds beyond the palace gates had grown larger, their cheers and applause creating a wall of sound that was both thrilling and overwhelming. As they settled into the car, William looked at each member of his family. Catherine sat beside him, her calm presence steadying his nerves. The children gazed out the windows with wide eyes, taking in the spectacle of the crowds and decorations. This was their family's moment in history, a day that would be remembered and studied for generations to come. The car began to move slowly through the palace gates and onto the processional route. Thousands of faces turned toward them. Cameras flashed like lightning, and the sound of cheering filled the air. William waved to the crowds, his trained smile hiding the nervous excitement he felt inside. Today would change everything for his family, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives and in the long story of the British monarchy. As they traveled through the streets of London toward Westminster Abbey, William held Catherine's hand tightly. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. The coronation ceremony was just the beginning of their journey as the future King and Queen of England. But in this moment, surrounded by the love of his wife and children, and the support of his people, William felt ready to embrace his destiny. The royal car moved slowly through the crowded streets of London as thousands of people lined the sidewalks on both sides. William could see excited faces pressed against the barriers that had been set up to keep the crowds organized and safe. Children sat on their parents' shoulders waving small British flags, their faces painted with red, white, and blue designs. Elderly people in wheelchairs had been given special spots at the front of the crowd, many of them holding photographs of Queen Elizabeth and wiping tears from their eyes as they remembered the beloved monarch who had passed away. The decorations throughout the city were unlike anything London had seen in decades. Every lamppost was wrapped in golden ribbon and adorned with fresh flowers that filled the air with a sweet fragrance. Large banners hung between buildings displaying the royal coat of arms and messages of congratulations for the new king. Street performers entertained the waiting crowds with traditional British music played on bagpipes and drums, their melodies mixing with the excited chatter of people from all walks of life, who had come to witness this historic moment. Catherine pointed out the window to show the children how many people had gathered to celebrate with them. Charlotte pressed her small nose against the glass and waved enthusiastically at a group of schoolchildren who were holding a large sign that read "Welcome King Charles." The children in the crowd went wild with excitement when they spotted the young princess, jumping up and down and calling out her name. George sat up straighter in his seat and gave a more reserved wave. Already understanding that his public behavior would be watched and remembered by millions of people, Louis bounced in his seat. Despite his parents' gentle reminders to sit still, his eyes were wide with wonder as he took in all the sights and sounds surrounding their car. When he spotted a group of people holding balloons shaped like crowns, he clapped his hands together and pointed excitedly. A woman in the crowd noticed his enthusiasm and threw flower petals toward their car, creating a shower of pink and white roses that landed softly on the windshield. The procession moved past some of London's most famous landmarks, each one decorated specially for the coronation. Tower Bridge had been draped with enormous flags that fluttered majestically in the morning breeze. The London Eye had been fitted with special lights that would create a spectacular display later that evening. Even the red double-decker buses that were still running their regular routes had been decorated with royal bunting and flowers. As they approached Westminster Abbey, the crowds became even thicker and more enthusiastic. People had been camping out for days to secure the best viewing spots near the ancient church, where kings and queens had been crowned for nearly 1,000 years. The abbey itself looked magnificent with its Gothic towers reaching toward the sky, and its entrance decorated with arrangements of white lilies and red roses that represented the unity of England. William felt his heart beating faster as he saw the abbey growing larger through the windshield. This was where his parents had been married, where he and Catherine had exchanged their own wedding vows, and where his grandmother had been crowned queen so many years ago. The weight of all that history seemed to press down on him as he realized that after today, his own place in that long line of royal tradition would be forever changed. Security personnel were stationed at every corner and rooftop, their presence barely visible but reassuring to William as he thought about the safety of his family. Snipers watched from hidden positions while plainclothes officers mingled with the crowds, their trained eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. The level of protection required for such a public event was enormous, involving thousands of police officers and military personnel working together to ensure everything went smoothly. The car finally came to a stop at the abbey's entrance, where a red carpet had been rolled out leading to the massive wooden doors. Palace officials and church representatives stood waiting to greet the royal family, their ceremonial robes and formal uniforms adding to the grandeur of the moment. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood at the front of the group, his face showing both the solemnity and joy appropriate for such a sacred occasion. William stepped out of the car first, immediately hearing the roar of approval from the crowds who had gathered nearby. Camera flashes went off like fireworks as photographers from around the world captured every moment of the family's arrival. He turned to help Catherine out of the car, offering his hand as she gracefully emerged in her stunning dress that seemed to glow in the morning sunlight. The children followed, with George walking confidently beside his father while Charlotte held her mother's hand. Louis looked around with wide eyes at all the people in activity, his small hand gripping William's jacket as he tried to take in everything happening around him. The family paused for a moment at the car to wave to the crowds, creating a picture-perfect moment that would be featured on the front pages of newspapers around the world. Inside the abbey, the atmosphere was equally impressive but more subdued and reverent. The ancient stone walls rose high above them, decorated with colorful banners representing all the nations of the Commonwealth. Hundreds of distinguished guests had already taken their seats, including prime ministers, presidents, and royal family members from countries around the globe. The pews were filled with people wearing their finest formal attire, many adorned with medals and honors they had received for service to their countries. William recognized many familiar faces as they made their way down the long aisle toward the altar. Foreign diplomats nodded respectfully as the family passed, while longtime family friends smiled warmly and gave small waves to the children. The Prime Minister sat in the front section reserved for government officials, wearing formal mourning dress and looking appropriately serious for the historic occasion. The Abbey's famous choir was already in position, their white robes pristine and their music stands ready with the ancient hymns and songs that would be performed during the ceremony. The organ, one of the finest in the world, filled the vast space with soft background music that seemed to make the very stones vibrate with harmonious sound. As they approached their designated seats near the altar, William could see his father, King Charles, standing in a special area reserved for the monarch. Charles looked regal and dignified in his ceremonial robes, but William could also see the slight nervousness in his father's eyes. This was a moment Charles had been preparing for his entire life. Yet the reality of actually becoming king was still overwhelming even for someone who had spent decades as heir to the throne. The family took their places in the front row of seats that had been specially arranged for them. The chairs were ancient and ornate, carved from dark wood and upholstered in rich red velvet. William helped Louis climb into his seat while Catherine made sure Charlotte's dress was arranged properly. George sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap and his attention focused on the altar where the coronation ceremony would soon begin. The abbey continued to fill with guests as the official start time approached. Every seat would be occupied by someone important, from Nobel Prize winners to Olympic champions to leaders of charitable organizations. The gathering represented the best of British society and the international community coming together to witness the peaceful transfer of royal power from one generation to the next. As the final preparations were made and the last guests took their seats, William felt a sense of calm settling over him. His family was here beside him, looking beautiful and behaving wonderfully despite the pressure of such a public event. Soon his father would be crowned king, and their lives would change forever. But in this moment before the ceremony began, William felt grateful for the love and support that surrounded him. The massive bells of Westminster Abbey began to ring out across London, their deep bronze voices announcing that the coronation ceremony was about to begin. William felt the vibrations through the ancient stone floor beneath his feet as 2,000 guests rose to their feet in unison. The sound was magnificent and overwhelming, filling every corner of the sacred building that had witnessed the crowning of kings and queens for nearly 1,000 years. Catherine reached over and squeezed his hand gently, her touch warm and reassuring. As they prepared to witness history unfold before their eyes, the Archbishop of Canterbury appeared at the altar wearing his most elaborate ceremonial robes, white silk embroidered with golden threads that caught the light streaming through the abbey's stained glass windows. His voice carried clearly through the vast space as he began the ancient words that had opened coronation ceremonies for centuries. The Latin phrases echoed off the stone walls, their meaning unchanged since medieval times when the first English kings knelt in this very spot to receive their crowns. King Charles walked slowly toward the altar, his purple velvet robes trailing behind him on the red carpet that had been specially woven for this occasion. The robe was so heavy it required 2 young pages to help carry the train, their small hands gripping the precious fabric as they followed the new monarch step by step. Charles moved with dignity and grace despite the weight of the ceremonial clothing, his face showing both the solemnity of the moment and the quiet joy of finally reaching this long-awaited day. William watched his father with deep admiration and love. This was the man who had raised him after his mother's tragic death, who had taught him about duty and service to the British people, and who had prepared him for his own future role as king. Charles had waited longer than any heir in British history to reach this moment, spending decades as Prince of Wales while supporting Queen Elizabeth through her remarkable 70-year reign. Now at last it was his turn to wear the crown and lead the nation. The crown jewels were carried into the abbey on velvet cushions by specially chosen guards, their presence causing a collective intake of breath from the assembled guests. The imperial state crown glittered with thousands of diamonds, rubies, sapphires and emeralds that had been collected over centuries. The St. Edward's crown, made of solid gold and used only for coronations, sat heavy and magnificent on its cushion, The sovereign's orb and scepter completed the collection, each piece representing different aspects of royal power and responsibility. George leaned forward in his seat to get a better look at the crown jewels, his young eyes wide with fascination at the precious objects that would one day be part of his own coronation. He had seen pictures of them in books and during private family visits to the Tower of London, but seeing them here in their proper ceremonial setting was completely different. The diamonds seemed to capture and reflect every ray of light in the abbey, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the ancient stone walls. Charlotte sat perfectly still beside her mother, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she had been taught. She watched every detail of the ceremony with intense interest, from the way the archbishop's robes moved as he walked to the expressions on the faces of the distinguished guests. Her own small tiara caught the light as she turned her head to follow the procession, making her look like a young princess from a fairy tale come to life. Louis tried his best to remain quiet and still, but his 5-year-old energy was difficult to contain during such a long and formal ceremony. He swung his legs gently from his tall chair and occasionally whispered questions to his parents about what was happening. When the choir began to sing a particularly beautiful hymn, he hummed along softly, his pure young voice barely audible but adding to the sacred atmosphere of the moment. The ceremony continued with readings from ancient texts and prayers that had been spoken at every British coronation for hundreds of years. The words connected this modern celebration to generations of kings and queens who had ruled before, creating an unbroken chain of tradition stretching back through centuries of British history. William felt the weight of that tradition settling on his own shoulders as he realized that someday he would stand where his father now stood. Prime ministers and presidents from around the world watched respectfully from their assigned seats, many of them moved by the beauty and solemnity of the ancient ceremony. The Commonwealth nations were especially well represented, with leaders from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and dozens of other countries that still recognized the British monarch as their head of state. Their presence demonstrated the continuing importance of the royal family in connecting Britain to its former colonies and current allies. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived as King Charles knelt before the altar to receive the crown. The abbey fell completely silent except for the archbishop's clear voice speaking the sacred words of coronation. Even the youngest children in the congregation seemed to understand the importance of this moment, sitting quietly as they witnessed the peaceful transfer of power from one generation to the next. William held his breath as the heavy golden crown was lifted high above his father's head. The St. Edward's crown had been used to crown every British monarch since 1661. Its weight both literal and symbolic of the enormous responsibility that came with ruling a nation. The diamonds and precious stones embedded in the gold caught the light from hundreds of candles and electric fixtures, creating a dazzling display that seemed almost magical in the sacred setting. As the crown was placed on King Charles's head, a tremendous cheer erupted from the crowds gathered outside the abbey. The sound penetrated even the thick stone walls, mixing with the organ music and choir voices to create a symphony of celebration that filled every corner of the ancient building. Bells began ringing from churches across London and throughout the entire United Kingdom, their bronze voices carrying the news of the coronation to every village and city in the realm. Catherine felt tears of joy beginning to form in her eyes as she watched her father-in-law officially become king. She had known this day would come eventually, but the reality of witnessing such a historic moment was more emotional than she had expected. Her own children were now one step closer to the throne, and the weight of that responsibility felt both thrilling and terrifying. For a mother who wanted nothing more than to protect her family from the pressures of public life, the newly crowned King Charles rose to his feet, the crown now firmly in place on his head despite its considerable weight. He turned to face the congregation, his face radiant with joy and dignity as he accepted the applause and celebration of his subjects. The moment had arrived that he had been preparing for his entire life, and despite the enormous challenges that lay ahead, he looked ready to embrace his role as sovereign. The archbishop presented the other symbols of royal power, including the golden orb representing the world and the jeweled scepter symbolizing the monarch's authority to rule. Each item was blessed and handed to the new king with words that had been spoken at British coronations for over 1,000 years. The ceremony was both deeply personal and magnificently public, combining intimate family moments with the grand pageantry that the British royal family did better than anyone else in the world. As the formal coronation ceremony neared its conclusion, William felt a profound sense of pride in his father and in his family's long tradition of service to the British people. The day had been perfect so far, filled with beauty, dignity, and the kind of historic significance that would be remembered for generations to come. Soon they would leave the abbey and face the crowds waiting outside, but first there were still more sacred moments to experience in this most holy of places. The coronation ceremony had reached its most sacred moment when something completely unexpected happened that would be talked about for generations to come. Little Louis, who had been sitting quietly in his ornate chair for over an hour, suddenly stood up and began walking toward the altar where his grandfather King Charles stood in his magnificent robes. The entire abbey fell silent as 2,000 guests watched the 5-year-old prince make his way down the aisle with determined steps. his small figure looking even tinier against the massive stone columns and soaring ceiling. William and Catherine exchanged quick glances of alarm and embarrassment, both wondering if they should rush after their youngest son or trust that he knew what he was doing. The Archbishop paused in the middle of his prayer, unsure whether to continue or wait to see what the young prince intended. King Charles himself looked down with surprise and growing delight as his grandson approached the throne, the heavy crown still resting on his head and the ceremonial scepter in his right hand. Louis walked with a confidence that only a 5-year-old could possess, completely unaware that millions of people around the world were watching his every step on television. His small suit was perfectly pressed, and his hair was still mostly in place despite the long ceremony. But there was something wonderfully natural and unscripted about his movement that contrasted beautifully with all the ancient ritual and formal protocol surrounding him. The young prince reached the steps leading up to the throne and stopped for a moment, looking up at his grandfather with bright eyes full of curiosity and love. King Charles set down the scepter carefully and reached out his hand toward Louis, inviting him to come closer. The gesture was so natural and warm that it brought tears to the eyes of many guests who had been watching the formal ceremony with great respect but perhaps not much emotional connection. Louis climbed the steps slowly, his small hands gripping the stone edges for balance. When he reached the top, he stood directly in front of his grandfather and reached out one tiny finger to touch the magnificent crown that sat on the king's head. The crown was covered with precious stones that sparkled like stars, and Louis seemed fascinated by the way the light reflected off the diamonds and rubies in rainbow patterns across the abbey walls. King Charles bent down slightly to make it easier for his grandson to examine the crown, his formal expression melting into a warm smile that transformed his entire face. The moment was so tender and genuine that it seemed to capture everything beautiful about family love and the continuation of royal tradition from one generation to the next. The heavy crown that symbolized the burden of kingship suddenly seemed less intimidating when viewed through the innocent eyes of a curious child. The Archbishop, seeing the beauty of the moment, decided to incorporate it into the ceremony rather than trying to restore the original formal order. He spoke about the importance of family and the way that love and tradition pass from grandparents to grandchildren, carrying forward the values that make a nation strong. His words seemed to bless not just the new king but the entire royal family, acknowledging that monarchy was not just about one person but about generations working together to serve their people. Charlotte, not wanting to be left out of this, a special moment, rose from her seat and walked gracefully toward the altar. Her pink dress rustled softly against the stone floor as she moved with the poise and dignity of someone much older than her 8 years. When she reached the throne, she performed a perfect curtsy to her grandfather, her training in royal protocol evident in every movement. The curtsy was so beautifully executed that it drew appreciative murmurs from the guests who recognized the skill and respect it demonstrated. King Charles was visibly moved by his granddaughter's gesture, placing his free hand gently on her head. In a gesture of blessing and approval, Charlotte beamed with pride at her grandfather's attention, her smile lighting up the entire altar area. The combination of Louis's innocent curiosity and Charlotte's formal respect created a perfect balance that seemed to represent both the humanity and dignity of the royal family. George remained in his seat, watching his younger siblings with a mixture of admiration and concern. As the future king, he understood better than his brother and sister the importance of following protocol and maintaining proper behavior during such a significant ceremony. However, he could also see that his grandparents and parents were not upset by the interruption but rather seemed to be enjoying this spontaneous display of family affection. The moment became even more special when King Charles made a decision that surprised everyone in the abbey. He carefully lifted Louis into his arms, holding his grandson close while still wearing the heavy crown and ceremonial robes. The sight of the newly crowned king embracing his small grandson while surrounded by all the ancient symbols of royal power created an image that would be remembered as one of the most touching moments in coronation history. Louis settled comfortably in his grandfather's arms, completely at ease despite being the center of attention for millions of viewers around the world. He pointed at different parts of the crown and whispered questions that only King Charles could hear, their private conversation adding an intimate dimension to the very public ceremony. The king answered each question patiently, his voice too soft for the microphones to pick up but his gentle manner visible to everyone watching. The choir, sensing the special nature of the moment, began singing a hymn about family and love that it seemed perfectly suited to the scene unfolding before them. Their voices rose and fell in harmonious waves that filled the abbey with music so beautiful it seemed to come from heaven itself. The combination of the sacred music, the ancient setting, and the tender family moment created an atmosphere of pure magic that touched everyone present. Catherine wiped away tears as she watched her father-in-law hold her youngest son, the sight more beautiful than anything she had imagined when they planned this day. The formal ceremony had been magnificent, but this unexpected moment of family connection was what would stay in her heart forever. She could see that William was equally moved, his face showing the same mixture of pride and emotion that she felt. William stood up and walked toward the altar, followed by Catherine, who moved with her characteristic grace and dignity. The family came together around the throne, with King Charles at the center holding Louis while Charlotte stood beside him and George joined them with quiet dignity. The sight of 3 generations of the royal family united in love and mutual respect was so powerful that it seemed to represent everything good about the monarchy and its role in British life. The Archbishop concluded the ceremony with a special blessing for the entire family, his words acknowledging that the crown belonged not just to King Charles but to the institution of monarchy that would be passed down through William to George and beyond. The blessing seemed to recognize that the strength of the monarchy came not from ancient traditions alone but from the living bonds of family love that connected past, present and future. As the formal ceremony concluded and the organ began playing the recessional music, the royal family remained together near the altar for a few more precious moments. King Charles continued to hold Louis while Charlotte stayed close to his side and George stood with perfect posture beside his parents. The image they created together was one of dignity, love, and continuity that would be remembered long after the specific details of the ceremony were forgotten. The unexpected interruption had transformed what could have been a distant and formal ceremony into something deeply human and touching, instead of diminishing the dignity of the coronation. The children's natural behavior had enhanced it by showing that the royal family was not just a symbol but a real family bound together by love and commitment to serving their people with grace and humility. The golden afternoon sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as the royal family prepared for the most public part of their historic day. The coronation ceremony inside Westminster Abbey had been beautiful and sacred, but now they would step onto the famous balcony of Buckingham Palace to greet the thousands of people who had been waiting patiently in the streets below. William adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time while Catherine smoothed down Charlotte's dress and made sure Louis's hair was still reasonably neat after his adventure at the altar. The sounds from outside the palace were incredible. A constant roar of voices, cheering, and singing that seemed to shake the very walls of the ancient building. People had been gathering since dawn, filling every available space along the mall and spreading out into the surrounding parks and streets. British flags waved like a red, white, and blue ocean as far as the eye could see, held by hands young and old from every corner of the United Kingdom and beyond. King Charles walked ahead of them through the palace corridors, still wearing his coronation robes but moving with a lighter step than he had shown all morning. The weight of the crown seemed less burdensome now that the ceremony was complete and he had officially become king. His face showed a mixture of relief, joy, and anticipation as he prepared to greet his subjects for the first time as their crowned monarch. The palace staff had prepared everything perfectly for this moment. The famous red curtains behind the balcony had been cleaned and pressed until they gleamed like silk in the afternoon light. Fresh flowers decorated the balcony railings, their bright colors chosen to complement the royal family's clothing and create a beautiful backdrop for the photographs that would be seen around the world. As they approached the doors leading to the balcony, William could hear the crowd growing even louder, as if the people somehow knew that their royal family was about to appear. The noise was overwhelming but also thrilling, representing the love and support of millions of people who had watched the coronation ceremony and wanted to celebrate this historic moment together. George walked beside his father with perfect posture, having practiced his royal wave many times in preparation for this public appearance. At 11 years old, he understood that his behavior would be watched and remembered by people around the world, and he was determined to make his family proud. His young face showed a seriousness beyond his years, but there was also excitement in his eyes as he prepared to step into the spotlight. Charlotte practically skipped with enthusiasm, her pink dress swishing around her legs as she moved. She had been looking forward to waving from the balcony almost as much as watching the coronation ceremony itself. Her natural charm and grace had already won hearts during the ceremony, and she seemed eager to share her joy with the crowds waiting outside. Louis bounced on his toes with barely contained energy, still riding the excitement from his spontaneous visit to his grandfather during the ceremony. His parents had gently explained that he needed to stay with them on the balcony, but his 5-year-old mind was already planning how he would wave to all the people below. His infectious enthusiasm had already made him a favorite with the public, and his parents knew he would charm everyone who saw him. The moment finally arrived as the palace doors opened and King Charles stepped onto the balcony first. The roar from the crowd was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to rise up from the street and wash over the royal family like a wave. Hundreds of thousands of people filled every available space, their faces turned upward toward the balcony with expressions of joy and celebration. William followed his father onto the balcony, immediately feeling the energy and love radiating from the massive crowd below. The sight was breathtaking, with people packed together as far as he could see in every direction. The British flags created a moving tapestry of color, while camera phones and professional cameras captured every moment of this historic appearance. Catherine emerged onto the balcony with elegant grace, her cream-colored dress catching the afternoon sunlight and making her look radiant against the backdrop of the palace. The crowd's cheers grew even louder when they spotted the future queen, many people calling out her name and expressing their love for the woman who had brought such dignity and warmth to the royal family. The children appeared together, with George maintaining his composed royal demeanor while Charlotte waved enthusiastically and Louis practically vibrated with excitement. The sight of the three young royals brought a new wave of cheers from the crowd, especially from families with children who had come to witness this historic day together. King Charles raised his hand to acknowledge the crowd, his gesture creating a moment of relative quiet as hundreds of thousands of people focused their attention on their new monarch. His smile was genuine and warm, showing his deep appreciation for the love and support being demonstrated by his subjects. The weight of responsibility was still there, but it was balanced by the obvious affection of his people. The family arranged themselves along the balcony railing, with King Charles at the center flanked by William and Catherine, while the children to spread out beside their parents. The formation was both natural and carefully planned, creating a picture that would represent the future of the British monarchy for generations to come. Louis could not contain his excitement any longer and began waving with both hands, his enthusiasm so genuine and infectious that it drew laughter and applause from the crowd below. His parents exchanged amused glances but made no attempt to restrain his natural exuberance, understanding that his innocent joy was exactly what the moment needed. Charlotte waved with practiced grace, occasionally blowing kisses to sections of the crowd that seemed particularly enthusiastic. Her natural charisma was evident even at 8 years old, and many observers commented that she seemed born for public appearances. Her confidence and charm suggested she would be a valuable asset to the royal family as she grew older. George maintained his dignified wave throughout the appearance, his royal training evident in every gesture. He seemed to understand instinctively how to acknowledge different sections of the crowd, turning slightly to make sure everyone felt included in his attention. His maturity and composure impressed even seasoned royal watchers who were amazed by his poise at such a young age. The Royal Air Force chose that moment to perform their traditional flight past, with historic aircraft followed by modern jets streaming across the London sky in perfect formation. The crowd looked up in wonder as the planes passed overhead, trailing red, white, and blue smoke, their engines creating a thunderous sound that added to the majesty of the moment. As the aircraft disappeared into the distance, the family continued to wave and acknowledge the crowd for several more minutes. The afternoon light was perfect, creating golden highlights on their faces and making the scene look like something from a fairy tale. Professional photographers captured thousands of images, knowing that these pictures would become iconic representations of this historic day. William looked out at the sea of faces below and felt overwhelmed by the responsibility and privilege of serving these people. The crown would come to him someday, but for now he was content to support his father and share this incredible moment with his wife and children. The love and enthusiasm of the crowd gave him confidence that the monarchy would continue to play an important role in British life for generations to come. As they finally prepared to leave the balcony, the royal family took one last moment to wave together, creating a final image of unity and grace that would be remembered long after the specific details of the day were forgotten. The coronation was complete, but their journey as Britain's royal family was just beginning, filled with both challenges and opportunities to serve their people with dignity, compassion, and love.